Welcome to the Nerd Party.
Let the filibustering begin.
Welcome to Nerd Party.
Hello and welcome to Filibuster here on the Nerd Party Network. Joining me for this landmark 250th episode, as ever, is Dallas King. Dallas, welcome to our historic episode.
I didn't realise it was a moment in history coming a day after another moment in history, which, because we're recording it the day before, we don't know the end result of.
Congratulations to President Biden or President Trump. But yeah, we've hit 250 episodes. I don't think when either of us started doing this that we would have anticipated that the world would be like this, the state of cinema would be like this, what would happen to the film industry. It's truly mind-boggling, and I know we've been going through this for about 8 months now, give or take, but even now I'm surprised that the way things continue to unfold and unravel for an industry that we love.
Yeah, I have to admit that I am, not a knock against our obvious talents, but the fact that we've actually managed to put out a brand new episode on a different topic every week during the lockdown, when there's, on occasions, very little new content to talk about. I think we've done very well to keep plugging away at it, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I must admit, I drew a blank until really the weekend as I tried to think of something that we could discuss with obviously the UK, well, England, all the cinemas there are shut down, apart from a Lone Star up in Aberdeen. Not many cinemas are open in the UK. Truly bizarre set of affairs. The amount of times when I lived in that region, and I knew as well, we've complained like, never get anything, now it's just ignored and so on, and now it's become the last outpost for cinema fans. It was one of those ones I thought, oh, what can we do and stuff like that. And then I thought, like, you know what, positive mindset, what three things have got us excited for the future of the industry. You know, it might have to do with the situation we're in it just now, you know, making a positive out of a negative, or it could just be something that we think, you know, maybe in a year or so's time we'll be hopeful and excited for. So I know I very much played by the rules last week when we did our all night horror madness ones. So I've kind of picked three things, you know, one hopeful, one positive, and one perhaps very controversial. So when I proposed this idea to you, Dallas, I know you'd mentioned to me this was a bit of a struggle for you to get a bit of a positive mindset drawn up. What was your reaction to this proposal?
Yeah, I know. I mean, I know that I'd suggested to you we do top three film and TV presidents, but apparently you'd done that on a podcast 4 years ago and felt that you jinxed it last time and you didn't want to do it again. So I've basically stuck around to the theme of where sort of cinema is at currently, and yeah, I've sort of picked sort of three things, which one of them is probably potentially it's going to sound negative to begin with, but then I think I try to put a positive spin on it and come out of it okay, I think. But yeah, they're all fairly sort of sticking to the idea of what bright lights are there that are still there that can shine brighter when cinema is allowed to, I mean, sort of eventually find its footing. I mean, it did find its footing for a couple of months, and then it's sort of like they've had like the table knocked out from under them, and they're having to start again from scratch. A lot of us, apart from us, obviously up in Aberdeen, you know, of course, things are already moving around distributor-wise, so whether or not we'll have anything to watch up in Aberdeen, I guess, is another thing. You know, I'm still keeping my fingers crossed for Mank, and I know you are, because I know technically you're not meant to be travelling from a level 3 to a level 2, but I'll keep it hush-hush.
Yeah, it's looking like I won't actually be travelling as it stands at the moment, so I have been torpedoed by that. I had hoped that I would be able to travel, but it's not looking likely. So let's hear, what was your third, you know, your number three that's got you excited and hopeful for the future?
First one is I was thinking about the death of the billion-dollar blockbuster. And
interesting. That is also my number three.
Is it? Okay. Yeah. No, maybe we're both coming out from the same rationale, but I think it's fair to say that the box office for Tenet was probably not what Warner Brothers were. Certainly wasn't what they were hoping for. Probably wasn't even what they were expecting, given that they were never actually able to properly really release it in the US because of the markets that were closed at the time. But I think it's probably fair to say, I mean, certainly in the UK, I believe Tenet did, it's probably just behind Interstellar in terms of box office. And then given the fact that, a lot of cinemas were closed, and they were probably looking at sort of around about 15-20% capacity in the screens of what they were able to do. It's actually a pretty decent number, but nothing like, I think it maybe did somewhere around about sort of 300-400 million worldwide, but certainly not what they would have wanted. And given the fact that things like Mulan and Black Widow and stuff have all been punted to next year, Bond's been punted to next year. I mean, you just have to look at last year's top 10 highest grossing box office movies, and I think about 8 out of the 10 were Disney or franchises owned by Disney, whether it was Star Wars, Marvel, and stuff like that. And pretty much all of them did close to, or if not exceeding, $1 billion. And I think it's fair to say that the days of a film getting that level of box office are probably over. And as a result, I don't think many many studios are going to be wanting to pump in sort of $250-300 million on making a film that they're then going to have to spend the equivalent on marketing it. Obviously, there's probably going to be some exceptions, say the Marvel Universe, which is already sort of 20 odd films down the line. They've got a lot of films into production, so I think they'll continue. I think like the Star Wars films and stuff, you're not going to see many sort of big budget films. I think they'll probably stick to Mandalorian style long form storytelling on Disney Plus and stuff like that. But I think, the days that we see those types of films are probably coming to an end. But what that could mean is that, I know a couple of years ago, people were bemoaning the lack of the sort of mid-tiered budget film somewhere that's sort of between sort of 30 and $80 million. Those were sort of foregone in exchange for sort of cheap and cheerful productions that you can sort of turn around and make a quick profit on, or everything was going into these big blockbuster movies. So I'm hopeful, he says, thinking that perhaps filmmakers might get more of a chance in being able to see the return to the sort of the Fox Searchlight and A24 glory days of these small budget movies where people are potentially more willing to take a risk on seeing something different. Because certainly if you look at blockbuster multiplex cinemas and stuff, they struggled on reopening. Indie cinemas, they did okay, smaller number of screens, slightly smaller overheads, not beholden to shareholders and stuff like that. They've got only 3 screens to fill with, whereas something like a Cineworld at mine, which has 10 screens, I mean, you're going to struggle to make your money back on something like that. So I think we'll see less big blockbuster films, but hopefully more risk-taking in terms of storytelling that studios make. What did you go with for your reasoning behind that?
Yeah, very much the same as yours. That it's one of those things that it's become incredibly clear. Like, it's one of those things, like, there's always been the chat that the bubble will burst with kind of big budget movies, whether it's Marvel, James Bond, you name it, these $300 million movies, etc. Where, like, eventually it's everyone always predicted it would be like streaming services that would just ebb away at it, and people would struggle to go to the cinemas. It's a fair argument, but the reality that we faced in 2020 is something that no one could have predicted or took into account would happen. So, I do think the argument has some weight, but it just doesn't match with obviously the reality. And we've seen it this year with things like Bond, for example. I appreciate, studios like MGM, etc., have to take into account the need to make their money back to be able to continue on as cinema houses and to be able to create the content. But I think what we've seen is that is so critically important, that huge number that they need to get in, the hundreds of millions in America, the tens of millions in the UK, the box office in China, picking up across the world. It's a high risk, but it's always largely proved a return. There's always the exceptions that kind of hit hard, but I think we kind of see now that it's it's pushed into a position where they've all got to go into next year. They're all maybe going to cannibalize each other. That some of them are not going to make their money back because if there's even a cure by the end of the year, are cinemas going to be able to open fully back up? Are we all going to be packing and enjoy midnight screening in IMAX? I don't know. I don't think anyone can truly predict at the moment. But I hope what studios will see is that while movies like this are going to struggle to make back the big money, that they need to be able to take risks again, invest in sort of younger, and even sort of older filmmakers. You think of someone like Paul Schrader, for example, with something like First Reformed. Give directors $1 million. Give them a couple million. I'm not even thinking 35 million. I'm thinking of taking the sort of the Moonlight approach. 1 million. Go make your film in Miami for 20 days or something like that, and we'll make something of it. Like, studios will surely see that that's the way to go. Like, that is a better chance on their return. They will be able to make a more diverse kind of, films out there, and they will be able to put those into cinemas and make better chance of return on their money than putting in hundreds of million film that will then have to be kicked out 5 weeks later for Fast and the Furious 9, which will then have to be kicked out for
Fast and Furious 10.
whatever. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and then which will be kicked out for the latest MCU movie. That if you put something in for in and around that price, we've seen some of the indie movies do really quite well. They've had long runs at the cinema. Things something like Saint Maud, which has done well. Was it Unhinged, the Russell Crowe one? Things like that. Like, that is the way to make a sustainable future, and it's some of the most interesting movies have been those kind of films, and they seem to be, studios have been turning away from them and having to rely on your A24s, your Neons, your Annapurnas and other indie houses to make those smaller budget movies. It's time for maybe Paramount, Disney, Fox to return to that and invest in the future, and hopefully we'll see something that could be, great for audiences, but also great for distributors and great for cinema and indie chains, because sometimes when a film like this comes along, it really bangs for crowds. So I'm hopeful for a return to that.
Yeah, I think this actually sort of dovetails quite nicely into my number 2 pick. So I could just launch straight into that, I guess. And my number 2 pick is one film in particular, but it sort of leads on to a wider discussion, as with all these sort of points do, and that is the film Host, directed by Rob Savage, which came out earlier this year, and is a horror film set entirely in a Zoom call. And I've always been a big fan of horror films, in the fact that the genre has always managed to sort of have its finger on the pulse and adapt quickly to the sort of fears of people today. So it's always gone in sort of cycles. So in the 50s, sort of around the time of, just the fallout of the Second World War and the Hiroshima bomb, there was a lot of nuclear themed horror films. And then, the Psycho and sort of Texas Chainsaw Massacre, when that sort of thing came in, that was when, sort of following the Ed Gein murders, when people realized that actually human beings are often more terrifying than anything that could come from outer space or the black deep or something like that. And then, horror films such as Ring, One Missed Call and stuff like that, which were dealing with our fears around technology and stuff like that. And then this sort of dovetails nicely into the fears currently going around the world at the moment. It's set during COVID. People are stuck at home and they're looking to sort of amuse themselves, and they get involved in a seance. And this is a film which was entirely scripted and filmed within Zoom, and it was made for a tiny budget, and did really well on Shudder and stuff like that. But then even got to the point where it was actually screened in cinemas on Halloween. And the filmmakers and the writers, including Gemma Hurley and Jed Shepard, the three of them have now got a multi-picture deal essentially with Blumhouse to make more films, and I believe they've actually already started on the next production. And Blumhouse is, I think what you were talking about, is one of these guys, sort of basically all orchestrated by Jason Blum, who's been one of the most influential producers in the last decade. And he sort of has a great eye for spotting talent, giving them small budgets, and then basically being able to make massive returns on those budgets. So his big one for this year was The Invisible Man, and its budget was $7 million, and it made $130 million worldwide. That is the right sort of business model to be having just now. And there's been a lot of great debuts sort of coming out during lockdown of sort of exciting filmmakers. I think sort of Claire Oakley for makeup and stuff like that. But I think Host sort of encapsulated everything that I was looking for. It was, maybe it's for some people might be perhaps it's slightly too close to the bone. Not as close to the bone as say people watching Contagion on Netflix, which was a entertaining sort of drama, sort of 9 years ago, but now actually turned out to be a spot on documentary instead. So, but I think that people. Horror was always one of those ones which is always best enjoyed in the cinema. People sort of reacting to the same moments. I remember like the biggest sort of reaction I had at the cinema this year was the restaurant scene in Invisible Man, and I look forward to getting back to a full cinema, not a socially distanced cinema where you've got about 12 people watching a film, because you can't get that sort of atmosphere going. But that kind of, once we get back to that stage and sort of discovering the next big horror film that people can get, because horror films, they can maybe be depressing, but it's also, you kind of know that it's not real, and you go there to feel something, to react to something. And I think it's almost a sort of cathartic sort of thing to be able to scream and yell and stuff like that. And that's what I'm looking for. But yeah, in terms of like the filmmakers and stuff that I've seen during lockdown, I think Rob Savage in that film was the one that stuck out to me most as this could be a bright voice in the future of filmmaking.
This was a film I really wanted to see. I know the film house here was showing it sort of in the past week or so, but just time got away from me, and I unfortunately never got the chance to see it in the cinema. I haven't watched it during lockdown either, so I will kind of get up on the TV in maybe the kind of coming weeks. I think it's one of these films where I've heard just nothing but universal praise. I've not heard any cynicism or any real kind of critique of it, so I'm really looking forward to diving into this one. And yeah, I think kind of tying into sort of what you're talking about, those smaller scale movies, I do think the Blumhouse quality is wildly erratic. You can have something like The Invisible Man sandwiched after sort of like Fantasy Island, and then I kind of felt it was a very mixed bag with the sort of Welcome to Blumhouse shows on Amazon. But they've got the right idea by and large. These smaller scale movies that you get a hit like Get Out, you have something like Invisible Man,
Yeah, Sinister as well. I think you're right that, I think by keeping the budgets small, they can afford to take risks. And yet, not everyone is going to be a Split or something that makes back $100 million. Some maybe just scrape back the budget, but then it's less of a financial worry to them, because it's like, okay, well, we can afford to take a hit on that because we didn't really spend too much on it. So I think that's the way that some studios are going to have to go. And sort of, not because I think, there's a few studios recently, I think Paramount, I think were one that were spending a lot of money on big releases and they just weren't hitting for one reason or another. And then that really sort of put them in a bad sort of financial position. So I think, it's got to be smaller budgets, bigger risk taking, and hope that whether it's through the marketing or stuff like that hopefully you hit big.
Yeah, so for my second one, I know this is something that does not apply to either me or you, but I think it's one of those things that's reaffirmed that we're not alone, and that's sort of appreciating our independent kind of cinemas. I think what we've sort of seen sort of during lockdown, I mean, it was great news today to see sort of a lot of funding has gone to independent cinemas up and down the country in Scotland today, and sort of the happiness that I've seen from these cinemas, from the staff, from the good people involved in film festivals throughout this country. It's been really great to see sort of that financial support arrive from funders today, and I'm so happy about that. But beyond that, what's given me a lot of happiness was over sort of the summer break during the lockdown for cinema chains, places like the Belmont, Glasgow Film Theatre, the Film House. There was a lot of talk about how does an independent chain with maybe one big screen and a couple smaller ones, how did they become economically viable? And the challenge is it's very hard to. It really is. And they reached out to people for help, for financial support, whether that was, chipping in some money, off the back of their, out of their paycheck that they were getting, whether that was buying memberships or vouchers, etc. And I kind of felt like they'll do well. I think the combined total that the Belmont and Filmhouse were after were, I can't remember, was it sort of 40,000 or something along those lines?
Yeah, I think
You
it was
know, I
about
think
25 for the Belmont, and I think about maybe it was about 60,000 for the for Filmhouse.
yeah, and I think today that they've mentioned that they managed to raise altogether about 100,000 grand, which absolutely boggles my mind that that was able to be achieved. And I'm so happy that it was. You know, you always kind of take it for granted that people like going to see these places and so on, but they do have other options. You know, sadly, if one of these cinemas went bust, there's maybe the other one sort of nearby, or oh well, I've still got my multiplex, etc. But I was so happy to see how people rallied around these cinemas and just threw money at them to allow them to continue on to get through this. And you know, it wasn't like that they were getting anything back from it. They were just getting the comfort of knowing that these cinemas would survive and that they were doing their bit, or they were able to just support an institution. And that made me so incredibly happy to see that happen. And again, people are rallying around again, you know, buying memberships, renewing early, buying vouchers, going to cafes, etc., you know, going out of their way to go to these places when it is really difficult at the moment. Because I don't know about you, but there feels like a pressure that we can put on ourselves where it goes, okay, I want to support this place, but then I want to support this place. This place is also in trouble, right? I want to maybe buy a tote bag from them. I want to buy a voucher from this local cafe, right? I'm going to buy an item from this shop for Christmas next year. My friend that's an artist is struggling, right? I want to throw it becomes very difficult and hard to sustain so many places, but a lot of people are kind of, you know, they're spreading themselves out, they're getting behind places, whether it's £5 to one place and 40 to another, it still all really counts. And you know, I talk about Scottish ones, but a place we both love, the Prince Charles Cinema. You know, people have been investing in the Patreons for their website, have been buying tickets, membership, lifetime memberships. They've got a web store now where you can buy Prince Charles Cinema tote bags, t-shirts. My tote bag should arrive this week. It's one of those things. I'm so happy to know that we are not alone in appreciating our independent cinemas, and it's given me so much hope that they will be able to endure and get through this. That I can't believe it, and I'm glad that I'm not shocked at how bad it's gone, but I'm surprised at how well it has.
Yeah, no, I think I'm on completely the same page as you. I mean, I'm certainly one that has. I mean, I was sort of always sort of trying to shop local and sort of like not eat out in chain restaurants and stuff like that. But so I've sort of doubled down on that during the thing. But then there is, like you say, there's so many different places that need your help. That it's like, so for like takeaways, it's like, you know, if I have like maybe sort of 2 or 3 a month, I'll sort of almost do like a rotation round, and then, you know, go for one week here and then go to the next one the week after and stuff like that. And then sort of local cafes and stuff like that. It's like, oh, I'll get my coffee from that place today, and then on the weekend I'll go and get something from this place. So yeah, and like with the Belmont, I'd donated at the, you know, when they needed it, and then but then it was like, oh, you know, cinema is an awfully expensive thing to do. You know, it's we sort of sometimes take it for granted with an unlimited card. But then of course when Cineworld shuts, it's like, okay, well, what am I going to do? And therefore I sort of renewed my membership at that point, and I think it's great to see so many people sort of supporting them, because you know it's a kind of thing that, you know, it's you use it or lose it. You know, it's, you know, people always say, oh, it's a great, Belmont's great, oh, that's great, when was the last time you were there? And it's like, oh, I went a couple of years ago or something like that. And it's like, well, you should probably go more often then. And it's, yeah, it's sort of making sure that you do support them while you can, and it's not just like an empty gesture and you say, oh, you know, it's like that thing of, oh, that place shut down, oh yeah, I was always meaning to go, and it's like, well, probably should have gone. So, but now that certainly in Aberdeen, it's now with cinemas closed, it's like the Belmont and the View, and as sort of the last cinema standing, it's going to be interesting to see if there's any sort of uplift from people who are still keen to go to the cinema when they can, and if they feel they want to. And yeah, it'll be, hopefully, again, this will be another point where hopefully distributors are able to support the cinemas that do remain open, because at the moment I think it's probably just sort of, you're looking at north of Dundee, really, isn't it? It's probably sort of in Scotland. You're looking at Aberdeen, Inverness, the Eden Court, I think, reopened for a couple of shows a week, as well. So hopefully they're doing okay. So Inverness, Aberdeen, there's a new cinema opened in Peterhead. So I guess we'll have to see how it goes, whether it's relying on sort of the classic content for another couple of weeks until everything sort of calms down again, or if they're still able to get new things as well. But I'm always going to be going into to see them, and I guess, I mean, I don't know how we've managed to do this, but this actually kind of leads into my final point. I don't know how we've done it because we didn't know what we were going to talk about. I'd written mine down things. It's seamless. We're just right on the same page, but different.
That's what we get when we get to like 250 odd episodes, just banging it out, segue after segue.
Yeah. Well, my final one is one which some might see as controversial given the fact that it's getting people into cinemas. But my final thought for hope was actually Netflix, and basically everyone's sort of been bashing Netflix for years, saying, "Oh, it's going to be the death of cinema. People are just going to stay home and watch movies and stuff like that." But I have to be honest, the films which I have watched at the Belmont since they reopened majority have been Netflix and Apple TV releases, whether that's Trial of the Chicago 7 or On the Rocks. Mank is upcoming as well. Rebecca is, I've gone to see them on the big screen, and Netflix, beyond probably Altitude in the UK, I'd say, are probably the studio, if you like, that have actually supported and made sure that films are getting into cinemas more than any other distributor. Because they're not really caring about the box office take. They don't care so much that the fact that they don't even release the numbers to the UK box office week on week. So it's more about building that buzz before it then gets released on the streaming channel, and then also to qualify for all the awards as well. There was a whole big thing a couple of years ago when Roma was winning all the awards. It was like, oh, it's terrible. It should not be shown in cinema without a proper theatrical window, etc., etc. But at the moment, they seem to be doing more than a lot of other places. And, obviously, I've used my Netflix account a lot during lockdown. I've watched a lot of movies and a lot of TV shows. But, they do seem to actually care about the survival of cinema. They do know that they can't survive on streaming alone. They need people to, without cinema, it's just, you basically sort of TV, they need that cinemas to survive in order to, it's like a cyclical relationship. They need them, and they're doing their best at the moment to try and make sure that there is stuff to go in. Obviously, certain chains and stuff are still refusing to do them, so I guess it benefits the independents even more. But long may hopefully that relationship continue, especially hopefully they don't get jittery feet and pull Mank out of the Belmont in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, it has been really impressive in the past few years, sort of Netflix and Apple TV getting behind that, because while it's great that everyone can access these things through their streaming services, for me, I still, if I got the option to pay £10 or whatever to go watch them in a cinema, I would take it, especially from filmmakers like Martin Scorsese, Sofia Coppola, David Fincher. I'd be all over it. I suspect I'm going to miss out the opportunity to see Mank on a big screen. I think it's just unlucky timing, ultimately, with the cinema world shutting down. They're not going to delay the film any longer. So, hopefully places like Aberdeen, etc. get it, and it becomes one of those weird anomalies at sort of a pub quiz where it was like, what was the only cinema in the country to ever show David Fincher's Mank? But for me, I've gone kind of similar, but more potentially controversial, especially in light of news that broke last week that seemed to get the internet a-buzzing with a bit of smugness, really. And that is, I think, what we're seeing this year is that the move towards digitized collections for people will continue, and that it can only benefit the environment, and it will become the popular norm. So I should kind of prefix this by, about a year and a half ago, I would not imagine I would be a digital movie collector. It would always be about owning the hard copy, having it on a shelf, being able to whip it out whenever I wanted. That would apply to TV box sets, that would apply to films. But at the kind of turn of last year, there would be films and shows that I wanted to own, but they weren't available here in the UK. So I would buy them on iTunes USA. I would buy one, maybe buy some more, and I discovered it was kind of a very positive thing. I think of so many films, I take Alien, for example, or Batman films, or The Thing, or Donnie Darko, Shaun of the Dead, bought them on DVD. bought them on Blu-ray, bought the special edition, will probably eventually buy the 4K. It becomes very financially difficult to continue to upgrade and buy films that you love and own when you want to sort of be able to watch it in the best format. iTunes does a great thing where you buy a film on HD, and when the film gets upgraded to 4K, that's your copy upgraded to. And I think that's fantastic and great for collectors. And I think the pricing of it all is really positive as well. I think it incentivized people to move towards digital. I should add, I've almost feel I've been semi-pushed into it by films like The Last Black Man in San Francisco not getting a release here in the UK, by things like Booksmart, for example, only getting a DVD release. So I think it's been really positive. And I know that there was the thing last week about sort of Amazon talking about, well, you don't really own it. And I kind of agree with that to an extent. Essentially, you have just taken out a long-term permit on something like that. But horror stories, you do get the odd horror story about someone having a title vanish. But it's so rare that it doesn't even concern me. And I think people are now going to invest in sort of digital collections. When you think how many films this year have gone straight onto iTunes, for example, as their way to see them because they've not been able to see it in the cinema. And I think once they've got one, once they've got two, they'll view it as that's the best way to do it. Even myself just now, I used to have a huge bookcase where it would just be stacked with DVDs and Blu-rays. I brought that down. And my Apple box that I can now, when I'm traveling, I can watch Curb Your Enthusiasm episodes, I can watch movies, etc. And it sort of feels good for the environment as well without the huge amounts of plastic, etc. But I will still continue to buy special editions. People like Arrow, for example, have done incredible things in the past few years with their collections, and I would encourage people still to buy them, and I will buy them. I will buy legacy box sets and things where I already own them on hard copies, like James Bond, Star Trek, for example. But I think I'm now sort of pretty much moved to sort of 80% digital going forward.
Interesting. Yes, I think it's probably fair to say that I'm probably at the opposite end of the spectrum on this one, which is probably why you threw it in there, knowing because it would probably get my back up a little bit. I've always been a physical media person. I've always known in the background that this whole sort of Amazon sort of iTunes thing, that you don't own it completely. Essentially, it's like a long-term rental of it, and if they decide to remove it from their servers, then that's it gone. So that was always something that was in the back of my mind. Would it have stopped me buying something? I've never really bought anything. Occasionally I would sort of rent something from the US store and stuff. It was something that wasn't sort of coming out here or something, but usually I would sort of probably wait and just get the Blu-ray or DVD in order to have it. If it was something that I've really, really enjoyed, I've certainly definitely sort of looking at my DVD collection now. It's from around about sort of 2018 to 2020. That only maybe takes up like 2 shelves out of the rest of it. I've sort of been a lot more selective in what I sort of buy, because I know that, well, certainly, but pre-lockdown, pre-COVID, the amount of new films that I was watching meant that, often I wouldn't have time or the inclination to stick on something and rewatch something that, I had on my shelf there. Also, given the fact that a lot of stuff is now rather quickly appearing on Netflix or Prime and stuff like that, so you can almost just stick it on the telly anyway. So I am sort of, like, I think like yourself, sort of restricting myself to sort of more sort of special editions with, that's one thing which sadly is on the wane on that side, is the, you don't get the same sort of level of director and sort of cast and crew commentaries and behind the scenes features stuff, which, when DVDs and stuff were first coming out, the main reason to get them was to get this sort of extra stuff. And it's still sort of weird that on Prime and Netflix and stuff, they don't sometimes offer these commentaries as an alternative audio track. But hey, that's another argument. But there is, like, some companies like you say, like Arrow are great. The sort of second sight films, which sort of purposely are picking films which maybe didn't get like a full proper release first time round, like Upgrade. Hey, get to mention Upgrade again. It's basically, got your standard sort of DVD release with like the original trailer and scene selections. So that was it, but they've gone and sourced some behind the scenes footage and stuff and been able to put together a really nice package. And they've got a fantastic, say, like Dawn of the Dead box set coming out in mid-November as well. So, that kind of thing. that sort of thing. And so obviously the Criterion Collection, which apparently HMV has a sale on selected titles, including a couple of Wes Andersons. I'm not sure if you've already bought them or not, but
Already got
you've
them.
already got them. Well, there we go. But the likes of this is how much Netflix has changed the game. Netflix films are now appearing on Criterion Collection. You've got Marriage Story, you've got Irishman, stuff like that. So they're no longer like the bastard cousin that nobody wants to talk about. They are sort of changing the game, and they have done. And but I think I will remain a physical media collector. Will I upgrade to 4K Blu-rays and Ultra HD DVDs and stuff like that? No, I probably won't. I think I'm probably gonna level out. I did once upgrade pretty much everything from VHS to DVD, and I just don't have the time, the inclination, or the money to upgrade everything again. So I think I'm gonna stick with Blu-rays and stuff. I'll obviously have to reassess that decision when they stop producing films in Blu-rays and the format dies. Maybe I'll have to get something else. But yeah, that's a bridge I will have to cross when I come to it, I think.
So while we're being hopeful for the future, some of these things are potentially long-term goals for us. What's something this week that you would recommend that's made you hopeful or happy, or that you would recommend, Alice?
Well, there was a few more films from Fright Fest, but since they don't have confirmed release dates yet, I'm going to hold off from recommending them until everyone can actually get to see them, because there's nothing worse than someone recommending something that you're not actually able to see. So I was going to recommend something, but you know what? No, I'm going to have to go with The Mandalorian Season 2 on Disney Plus, because most people have probably got that now following lockdown, and it for me. Last Jedi aside, is easily the best thing that Star Wars has produced since Empire Strikes Back. I thought the first season was fantastic, and they're setting themselves out very well for season 2. There was mention of him having to find another Mandalorian on Tatooine, and I was like, ooh, I wonder who that could be. And yeah, it wasn't exactly what I was expecting, but anytime that Timothy Oliphant is just someone who makes anything better in it. He was fantastic in it, and a really interesting character. That episode, I'm not sure if you've seen it yet, but it seemed to.
I've only seen the first 2 episodes of The Mandalorian, Alice, so carry on.
Well, let's just say it seems like that episode was designed and released when they thought June was going to come out at the end of December. So it's a little stopgap until June eventually comes out, whenever that may be next year. But yeah, I know you in particular, I think we're bored of the Baby Yoda memes. There's going to be no stopping them over the next couple of months, but I think is fantastic. It sort of harks back to the sort of inspirations for the original Star Wars that George Lucas had in terms of like the samurai films and the westerns and stuff like that. There's even an aspect ratio change in this episode. It was like, choice. And yeah, no, it's a really bold start to the start of the second series, and I look forward to seeing where it goes from there.
So I've gone for I know you were sort of saying not to recommend things that aren't out yet, but I'm going to recommend something that drops next week, and that's something where I watched an advanced screener of it, and it really caught my attention. So if you're looking to do sort of the 52 films by women challenge, I would recommend it as well, and that's from Juliet Landau, who might sound a bit familiar to nerdy listeners. She played Drusilla in Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and she's released this sort of interesting documentary that's a sort of mix of fact, fiction and fantastical, where sort of it's an exploration of sort of the cultural obsession with vampires and what they reveal about the human psyche. And she plays sort of an alter ego version of herself, and so do sort of, she has like an array of characters that appear in this. So Gary Oldman's in it, Ron Perlman, Robert Patrick, Lance Herniskin, Joss Whedon from sort of Avengers fame.
I thought you were going to say Robert Pattinson talking about Twilight.
Yeah. Oh God, that was probably the one they missed out on. So they all talk about sort of the true crime and the reality of when people take the fantasy of sort of vampires sort of too far. It's a really interesting, a bit messed up and disturbing kind of documentary sort of take. It was really stood out. It was one of those things I just sort of, it dropped into my inbox, watched it, and I was like, wow, I did not expect that whatsoever. And that is something that's rare to see in 2020 with much surprise. So I would highly recommend checking that when it drops on POV on the 9th of November.
I think I probably will. I think, yeah, I remember her from the Buffy and Angel days. So yeah, no, I think that sounds quite interesting. But yeah, no, you see, a week delay, that's fine. A lot of the films which I was going to recommend on Fright Fest have not got a release date at all yet, so I'll need to hold back on some of those. But there's one in particular which I really did enjoy, and I look forward to people seeing that. And I may have an back and forth email conversation with the director, so I might be also able to get him on and interview him for the podcast. But he wrote, directed, produced, did the cinematography and the editing on it. So yeah, that should be a fun chat if I can get him on.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much to everyone for joining us today and for sort of the previous 250 odd episodes. And stay safe out there, and hopefully we'll all kind of, just hope everyone's safe. Take care. Bye.
Join the revolution. Join the Nerd Party.
Welcome to Nerd Party.